and welcome to my home kitchen. Today we'll be making buttermilk biscuits. This is a super versatile recipe, really easy recipe to learn, and it produces a biscuit with a beautiful golden brown top. The insides are light and fluffy and super buttery. So let me show you how to put them together. There's not a lot of special equipment you need to make this recipe. One exception would be a digital scale. You'll need this to measure out the exact amounts of the flour mix. But outside of that, the tools you'll see me using I would consider optional, but if you make this recipe often, it might be something worth picking up in the future. You'll see me use a pastry cutter when I'm cutting the fat into the flour, but if you don't have one, use your fingertips. You'll see me using a bench scraper when I'm working with the dough and moving the dough around the counter. At the very end, I'll use a pastry brush to spread on some butter. And you'll see me using a biscuit cutter when I punch out my biscuits. First, let's put together our flour mix. You'll find the most up-to-date version of this recipe at wellproof.com, including all the exact ingredients, their amounts, and any recommended brands to look for. In this recipe, we're going to be using 2 different starches and 2 flours. So we're going to use potato starch as well as tapioca starch. And then we're going to be using 2 different kinds of white rice flour. The first one is your traditional white rice flour you'll probably find in your local grocery store. The second one is a super fine milled white rice flour. And using all 4 of these together, I feel gets at that really unique texture of a great biscuit. Like a great biscuit is tender and fluffy, but there is almost like a little bit of a crumbly texture to it too. And combining all of these 4 together, I think absolutely nails it. Moving on from our flours, we're going to use a couple of special ingredients to get the texture and the moisture we're looking for. So a lot of our structure is going to be coming from whey protein concentrate. And then we're going to use 2 ingredients to hold on to just the right amount of moisture. So we'll be using a little bit of xanthan gum as well as a little bit of psyllium husk. To get our rise, we'll be using baking powder and baking soda. And lastly, we have a little bit of salt and sugar. If you haven't already done so, now is a great time to start getting your oven preheating up to 450 degrees. We're going to combine all of our flour ingredients in the bowl. If you have a mesh strainer, I like to run the potato and tapioca starch through this as they can be a little bit lumpy. But if you don't have one of these, don't worry about it. Just give it a good whisk at the end. And we're just going to give these ingredients a really thorough mix. We want to make sure that the xanthan gum is really evenly distributed in the flour. I'm just turning the bowl with my hand and whisking with my right hand, working my way around the bowl. Now you saw me just put together enough mix to make a single batch of biscuits. What I actually recommend people do is make a 3, 4, 5x batch. You can store it in your pantry for months, and when you want to make biscuits, you can just pull it out and get going. All right, it's about final assembly time. This is going to come together very quickly, so I want to make sure I have everything that I need in front of me. I have a sheet pan with a piece of parchment paper on it. My oven is to temp at 450 degrees, and we have our final ingredients here. This is half a stick of butter, just cut up into little pats. This is half a stick of shortening. That is if you buy your shortening like I do in these blocks. We have 300 grams of buttermilk, and then I have scratch flour. So this could be any gluten-free flour that you have in your house. It could be extra biscuit mix. In my case, this is white rice flour. First, we'll cut our fats into the flour mix. This is my butter. This butter, the buttermilk, the shortening, this is all cold from the fridge. I actually store my shortening in the freezer just to keep it really cold, but everything else is fridge temperature. And we're going to start cutting our fats into the flour. I'll be using the pastry cutter. And I'm pushing down all the way to the bottom of the bowl. I'm trying to cut through and break up these pieces of fat into smaller pieces. And I'm just spinning the bowl with my left hand as I work my way around. As you do this, you'll find some of the fat will start clinging to your pastry cutter. And every once in a while, I'll come back around with my butter knife and just scrape it down back into the bowl. We're not looking for this to be, perfectly uniform. There should be discrete chunks of fat in here. We just don't want any really big pieces. And once you think you're getting close, let me give this another scrape. I like to give the bowl a little shake. You just kind of shake it like this. You'll see any bigger pieces of fat will make their way up to the top, so they're easier to see. And final scrape here. I think this is looking pretty good to me. Next, we'll add our buttermilk. And I like to use a rubber spatula for this first part. I'm just going to scrape down the sides of the bowl, and I'm folding all of that dry flour mix into the buttermilk, into the center of the bowl. Just working my way around the sides, and I'm trying to get kind of underneath of it. What I'm trying to avoid is just any pockets of dry flour that doesn't get well incorporated here. And I'm not expecting this to come together as a complete dough yet. This should just be a real shaggy dough. So it's already starting to get close here. I'm going to do a couple folds all the way underneath. I'm folding on top and I'm kind of pressing down here. All right, that's pretty close. If you get to this stage and your dough is really wet and really sticky, perhaps you used a little too much buttermilk, or maybe the flour that you're using is just not absorbing quite at the same rate that mine is. This is a good point that you can kind of walk away for 3 to 5 minutes. That flour will continue to hydrate from that buttermilk. It'll become much easier to work with. Mine doesn't look too bad here, so I'm just going to keep going. Before I dump this out on the counter, that's our next step, I'm going to put down some scratch flour. So that was mentioned earlier. This is just white rice flour, but this could be any gluten-free flour you want to use. And I'm just going to liberally sprinkle some here onto the counter. And you see I've got some dry flour mix still in the bowl here. That's all right. Just put it right on top. And I'm going to start using my bench scraper here to clean off my spatula. All right, at this stage, we have a super shaggy dough. It's a little crumbly. It's not very well mixed. We're going to start bringing this together with our hands. If it's super sticky on top, it's not a big deal. If you put a little more flour on top, feel free to put a little bit of flour on your hands. We're going to start bringing this together into a ball. We're going to start pressing it down with our fingertips. And we're going to do a series of folds. So I'm going to grab my bench scraper here. I'm going to get under the dough and fold it on top of itself. And I'm going to continue bringing the dough together with my hands and pressing it down into the counter. If you have any really dry, crumbly pieces that are falling up the side, place them in the center. And as you go here, you'll see the dough starts to come together. Once again, if it's sticky, feel free to use a little bit more flour. You'll get some amount of stickiness on your hands, and that is to be expected. Another fold. Usually at this stage, I start to think about adding a little bit more flour to my counter. Starts to get a little sticky. And if you need to do that, you just grab the dough, set it aside, add a little more flour. All right, so this is starting to come together. I'm looking, especially around the edges, to see if there's any big dry cracks or fissures around the edges. And this is starting to look pretty cohesive. I think we're on our third fold. I'm going to give it one more here and see how it looks. my oven just turned off. Not done with you yet. All right, getting a little sticky. All right, now in my final fold here, I'm starting to think about the thickness that I need this at for my biscuits. I generally like to flatten this out to about 1 inch thick. And I'll actually get down next to the counter here, get a better eye at it. As you're flattening it out, you'll see you might get little cracks. Go ahead and just use your hands to push those back in. Kind of using your hand as a guide. All right, that's looking pretty good to me. We're at about 1 inch thick. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to bring out a tape measure for this. But it's about time to start cutting out our first round of biscuits. Got a 2 1/4 inch cutter here. I'm gonna dip it in our scratch flour to keep it from sticking too badly. And I've got my pan here ready to receive them. Go ahead and punch all the way down to the counter. Give it a little quarter twist. Usually for me, it'll pick up right with the cutter. And I'll either shake it out, or if it's really sticky, push it out of the biscuit cutter. And I'm gonna put these on my pan in 3 rows of 4, or 4 rows of 3. Between each biscuit, make sure you reflour your cutter. It will get sticky. And I'll usually tap off any extra flour just so it doesn't build up on the biscuits too much. Try to maximize as many biscuits as you can without having to re-roll. It's not a big deal, but saves you a little time and effort. All right, we got about 7 biscuits from our first round of cutting out from our dough here. We need to put this dough back together, fold it again, flatten it out, and we'll continue cutting. One trick that I really like, the top of this dough and the bottom of this dough have flour on it. They're not very sticky, but these sides that we just cut from are a little bit sticky. I like to use that to my advantage. So I'm actually going to press all these cut sides back together. Flatten it out a little bit. Now all those sticky sides are touching each other and adhering pretty well. That's already just about good to go. I'm going to give it one more fold. Bringing the sides in, and we'll flatten this out. Once again, I'm using my hand to kind of help shape the dough. And you can start thinking here about the size cutter you have and how much dough you have left. And you can cheat it a little bit. I think right now I'd only be able to get maybe 2 biscuits out of this dough. If I were to do a bit of a narrower, longer dough, I bet you I could get 3. And it's pretty forgiving. It's not like in the gluten world where if you overwork this, it's going to get tough. Yeah, I could probably get 3 out of this now. Let's try. Ooh, so close. I'm going to cheat a little bit. And we're going to continue re-rolling our scraps until they're all gone. You'll probably end up with an odd bit of dough left. You can throw this out if you want to. I don't really like to waste it. And I have a dog who loves this. This is the Pupscuit in our house. So I'll usually just hand roll a little pinwheel or just push together whatever scraps you have left and find a little space for it on your pan. All right, it looks like we ended up with about 11 and 1 Pupscuit. The recipe says a dozen. Really, it comes down to exactly how thinly you press them out and what size cutter you have. But these look good. I've got them spaced out fairly evenly on the pan, and I'm gonna pop these in the oven. They're gonna bake at 450 degrees. And I'm expecting these to take somewhere around 10 to 12 minutes. I'm really gonna start paying attention to that 10-minute mark. And depending on what size you have and how thick they are, they may need a little bit more time. All right, I'm gonna get this mess cleaned up and we'll get the biscuits out and I'll show you what to look for to know that they're done. Our biscuits are out of the oven. It smells amazing in here. I've transferred them to a cooling rack and I'd say they were in there for about the full 12 minutes. I forgot to actually start my timer, but it was about 12 minutes. Before I brush butter on these, let's talk about some of the signs that your biscuits are done. They should have a really deep, beautiful golden brown top crust. The sides of the biscuit will remain relatively pale, and that's normal. The bottom of the biscuit should have also a golden brown color to it, but not quite as dark as the top. I would let them cool maybe 3-5 minutes. I'm guilty of not waiting at all, but a couple minutes does let them set nicely. And while they're cooling, you can brush them with a little bit of melted butter. Now my oven cooks a little bit unevenly. You'll notice my row over here is a little blonder than the rest of these. If your oven does and that bothers you, feel free to rotate these about halfway through. And you don't have to brush them with butter at the end, but I always do. All right, these are ready to enjoy. I'll break one open and dress it up how I often do in the morning. You don't have to use a fork, but sometimes I'll break them open with a fork. They're pretty flaky layers. You could honestly just pull this apart with your hand if you wanted. Still a little steamy. I'll usually do one kind of savory biscuit and 1 or 2 sweet biscuits. I wish I took my butter out of the fridge a little earlier. That's all right. I'm a big fan of a little bit of honey on one, honey and butter. Not too much. And your favorite strawberry jam. I have a dog watching me. I think most of us think about breakfast time when we think about biscuits. These are absolutely killer as a sausage, egg, and cheese, or biscuits with sausage gravy, or perhaps a sweet biscuit like I just enjoyed. But I think the real power and joy of knowing this recipe comes when you think a little bit outside of breakfast, because these biscuits can be sweet or savory, and they work so well in many savory dinner time applications. And the number one way that I like to enjoy these biscuits is as a buttery golden brown top crust to a chicken pot pie casserole. So I encourage you all to be creative and think about where you might want to use these in your life. And if you have a recipe you think these would be great in, let me know. I'm very curious to hear what other people come up with. Thank you for watching. I really hope you try this recipe. For the full written recipe, go to wellproof.com. And while you're there, check out the community. You can chat with me and other bakers in the community, get bake support, share your ideas, maybe talk about what recipe we should develop next. And if you made this, please take some photos, come say hi, share your work. I would really love to see it.